Hi, this is Jonathan Rosenhead, the Jerusalem psychotherapist. This week's Torah and Psychology post for Parshas Beshalach is titled Slave Mentality. In this week's Parsha, the Bnei Yisrael leave Mitzrayim, they experience the miracle of Kriyas Yamsov, and they start their journey in the Midbar. But we see a repeated theme of the Bnei Yisrael complaining that they've left Mitzrayim, complaining about being now in this situation of being in the desert and wishing that they could go back to being slaves to the Egyptians. We see that when the Bnei Yisrael are being chased by the Egyptian army, they complain about not having any water, they complain about not having any bread. And again they say that they wish they could go back to being in Egypt, that it was better for them in Mitzrayim, that they had food and they had water and they were able to live comfortably. And now they're in the Midbar and they're at danger and their lives are at risk and they wish they could go back. The question is, how is this possible? How could they possibly think back and reminisce with fondness about their time as being slaves? And the Ibn Ezra asks, when the Bnei Yisrael are being chased by the Egyptian army, why did they panic? Why didn't they just turn around and fight the Mitzrayim? They outnumbered them. And the Ibn Ezra explains that the Bnei Yisrael had a slave mentality. That they looked at the Egyptian army and what they saw was their masters. They'd grown up as they were a generation of slaves. They'd grown up to be accustomed to being slaves. And what they saw were their masters, and they had this slave mentality which stopped them from being able to fight. They could not bring themselves to fight against their masters. So this slave mentality can be explained from different angles from a psychological perspective. First of all, we have what's known as Stockholm Syndrome. Now, although Stockholm Syndrome is not an actual disorder in the DSM, it does explain in a way the defense mechanism of a person who is in captivity, where they create some sort of a connection, some sort of affection or loyalty to their captor as a way of being able to cope with the traumatic stress that they are in during captivity. It's a defense mechanism. And this explains as well perhaps why people who are in traumatic situation, or particularly in abusive relationships, why they are not able to leave, or why they come back to putting themselves again and again into an abusive relationship. Because it's in some way it's a defense mechanism. It's a way of being able to cope with the situation. It's a way of being able to make sense in a way of the situation, that they focus on the connection that they have with the person. It's a distorted cognition of focusing on the fact that the person does actually love them, or that this is their life. They focus on the comfort zone of not wanting to leave this comfort zone and being and facing the world outside of abuse, and rather staying within the abuse because that's what's familiar to them. And we can also explain that from a psychodynamic perspective, that when a person is in a traumatic situation, they experience something called splitting, where they split the experiences that they have, the negative experiences and the memories that they have in themselves. They split it from their current personality, and they split it from their own memory, and they put it in their unconscious, in a subconscious place, because it's too difficult for them to face it. It's too difficult for them to process these negative experiences and these negative memories. So they split it as a state of dissociation. And finally, we can say on a basic normative level, on a day-to-day level, people are inclined to remain within their comfort zone, to not want to try to experience new things and to challenge themselves, because they say, this is what I'm used to, this is what I'm accustomed to, this is how I grew up. And to change that is very difficult. So this message of slave mentality is to not be a slave to this slave mentality, to be prepared to change, to be prepared to look at the world in a different way, and to view yourself in a different way, to view yourself as a free person. Have a great Shabbos and keep well.